check into the mic. Check, check. Check, check, check. Hey, 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 hey. Hey, hey, hey.
Good evening and welcome. I am James Brown, co-founder of Bread and Salt. Thank you for attending this evening's discussion, both in person and virtually. It's being recorded and played back on our YouTube channel, Bread and Salt San Diego, so you can check it out right now. For those of you out there, thanks for listening in, and you guys can check it out in its entirety later if you want to, too. We are gathered to discuss the remarkable action by the City of San Diego and the Commission for Arts and Culture of 100 works of art purchased directly from San Diego artists during a period when the artists needed help the most during these challenging times. The action was deeply helpful to the hardworking artists of San Diego. Thank you, City of San Diego. I hope that this type of direct action initiative will not be the last, and that through public-private partnering, it might even be a yearly or bi-yearly initiative. The duration of this discussion will be an hour and a half, more or less, which is probably not enough time, but we will work with what we have. We will break the evening into about a 1-hour discussion among the panelists, followed by a half hour or so of questions from the audience. And should you have any questions, there's a dedicated microphone right up there that you can walk up to the mic and ask some questions of the panelists at that time. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to thank the hardworking people of Bread and Salt for their work in hosting San Diego Practice and the San Diego Design Week. I thank Artistic Director Isabel Dutra, Lead Curator Thomas DeMello, Michael J. Armstrong, Jason Lane, Griselda Rosas, and Jamie Frank for the many hours of sweat and heart that culminates in our panel discussion tonight. Thank you for your efforts. Joining us today are 4 of the 5 curators for the San Diego Practice exhibition. On the left, Anthony Graham, Associate Curator, Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, and Commission for Arts and Culture Public Art Committee member. Alessandra Moctezuma, artist and gallery director and professor in the Fine Arts Department, Museum Studies at San Diego Mesa College. Gaidi Finney, executive director, San Diego African American Museum of Fine Art. And Dr. Eun Jung Park is a professor of art history and contemporary art at Southwestern College. She also serves as a member of the Commission for Arts and Culture Public Art Committee for the City of San Diego. One member, Derek Cartwright, could not be with us tonight. He had to travel today. But other than that, we have a good showing. And thank you very much for taking the time to come in and talk to us tonight. It's really appreciated. We will be tonight examining the role of institutions in collecting and exhibiting contemporary art, focusing on recent approaches and trends in art patronage, with a particular focus on supporting local artists in our city and region. I will ask questions of the group as a whole, so anyone can begin to discuss the question, with others adding or joining in at will. And feel free to break out into a full-fledged conversation if you care to. Sometimes it's hard in this format to do that, but we can try. So, let us begin. You each represent institutions of differing scales with unique communities of followers. One goal of art patronage is to advance the careers of exceptional local and regional artists. What goals do your institutions have with respect to this, and what methods do your institutions take to achieve these goals?
Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Gaidi. Our mission's a little different in that we try to focus on those artists who are well-known internationally, but also have a relationship to San Diego at times. So it's important that for me and for Black Americans, the population has shrunk a little bit, and there's less representation of African American art and artists. So what we do is every year we do an annual event called Keepers of the Culture. And in that event, we really do focus on those local artists who've kept culture alive in San Diego and present them awards and have them have the ability to talk. So that's our main piece of working with our local artists.
Thank you for inviting me. At the College Gallery, my main focus is really to present the work of emerging and established regional artists. And I think it's really important because the colleges, universities, alternative art spaces, community spaces can play a really, really important role in highlighting and presenting the work of the artists of this city. I've been there for 20 years, and in my roster of exhibitions, I have really focused on the idea of diversity. And so I've brought a lot of artists who had been sometimes ignored by the mainstream art world as a Latina and somebody who's originally from Mexico. When I studied, at UCLA and in Los Angeles, I saw that many of the artists who I admired and I had worked with, whether it be Chicano, Black artists, had been left out at that time in the 80s, 90s of the many institutions. So I made it my goal as director of the Art Gallery at Mesa College to present works of BIPOC artists and also the work of women. So I think that we play a really important role, and I think one of the hardest things to fight is that a lot of times people think that college or university galleries only show student work, and they don't realize that there's amazing artists that are being shown there. We also do that for the benefit of our students so that our students can learn from those artists. And of course, at the end of every semester, we do celebrate the work that is produced by students in the department. But I think that we can play a really important role in presenting the work. And being a binational city, I've also had a lot of collaborations with artists from Tijuana, so the gallery is also a forum for that dialogue.
I would echo a lot of the things that Gaidi and Alessandro have said. I mean, obviously, we are working at really different scales at our three institutions. And at MCASD, we're presenting artists who are working nationally and internationally. But, I think we are, really committed to this place that we're in, and it's an important part of our program. And so for us, I think that is evident in the exhibitions that we put on. Having recently done an exhibition of artists from San Diego and Tijuana in 2018. It feels, I'm like trying to remember when that was. And that's something the museum has done semi-regularly since the mid-1980s. But it's also reflective of in our collection. The institution's always been a collecting museum and has been building its collection since the 1940s, and so that's another really important aspect of supporting artists for us generally, but supporting artists in San Diego and Tijuana. And yeah, so that's I think part of our commitment to supporting the region.
I can't really speak to the institution as just the educator at Southwestern College, but I would like to just extend gratitude for the Public Arts Committee, especially in putting this together, because it really shows that it's beyond just inclusion, just including BIPOC artists and things like that, but beyond that, like system-wide, like how can we really shift things system-wide? Because even in the call-out or description of this talk, there are words that really ring the legacy of colonialism, like collecting, exhibiting, patronage. Those words are heavy. And so, especially now in a period where we're very self-reflective, I think institutions and also, champions like Christine Jones and Charles Miller and people who work there are really like providing a radical model such as this that made SD practice possible.
Thank you for those answers. If San Diego practice is considered a civic model of art patronage, This panel represents museum models and educational models. Other models include private models, such as galleries, hybrid models that I think possibly Bread and Salt is. I think we're a hybrid of a museum and a gallery, and collective models, such as Patreon, Kickstarter, etc. Where might the art patronage of tomorrow be headed?
I'll jump in again. We are a museum without walls, which is a little different than the ones that you mentioned. And so to me, COVID did something. It kind of leveled the playing field for those people who didn't have buildings, because no one could go into the museum. So all these museums started figuring out what they could do without people going into museums and still have their membership. And that's what we've always done. So to me, I said, well, maybe we can make something us more important in that respect, because we've always been a museum without walls, and really dig into that. Because in order for us to do an exhibit, I have to find a place that's going to let us have it at a certain time, and what that might cost and all that. So we got to do that first before we do anything, before we do marketing, before we do fundraising and all that. So I'm used to it, not having a space, but at the same time, getting people without a building, having them come to us, has always been our forte. So I'm looking at it as a strength that happened during COVID for us to be a more important institution, even though we don't have a building.
I would say that all of the different kinds of organizations and institutions you listed as part of patronage, like the future of patronage is having as many of those kinds of places as possible, to have a really rich and varied group of organizations that are kind of working in tandem, working as an ecosystem to support artists and to support the community on a multitude of registers. That you have galleries like Bread and Salt that can host a panel, on somewhat short notice, and you can have an organization that takes 2 years to plan a large exhibition about something, or you can have the Commission for Arts and Culture do this incredible initiative for 100 artworks, which is like such a huge undertaking. And so I think like the future is to have like as many of these different things working alongside one another, because the reality is none of those one forms of patronage is a solve all, but rather, all kind of necessary for a larger network.
Okay, I just want to finish what I was directly. In the future, I think museums will be online as well as a local or a building purpose. I'll do both prongs. Sorry.
I would say that let's shift the notion of patronage to community nurturing of the arts. And I think, because again, like Un said, patronage comes from this colonialism, and I think that people have to have a sense of ownership of the art. And I'm thinking of models that are not entirely new, because if you look at the Centro Cultural de la Raza or Chicano Park, or Lace in Los Angeles, or the Women's Building, there were many models where it was a community of artists, a collective of artists that came together and figured out how to make it happen. So I think that we have to, recently more artists, more Black artists, more Latino artists have gained the spotlight, partly because Black Lives Matter and other important movements of resistance, and I think that there's a new generation of young people that maybe will realize that it is important to support culture, and I hope that the Arts Commission and cities and other grantors, foundations, realize that it's important to fund the smaller groups, the communities, centers, the smaller nonprofits that are doing the work, as much as it is funding the big exhibitions or the museums. So I hope that we can shift that paradigm so that so that the support is more equally distributed.
I couldn't agree more, especially because the larger big box museums have endowments that cover operation costs. So it's not like they're gonna struggle as much as, you know, the hybrid model or the smaller gallery or the cultural center that operate on a shoestring. So I really think that what Alexandra was saying in terms of, you know, creating a separate community, a separate organism of sorts that support each other and trespass different areas of, and reimagining what art is and how art should be displayed, from taking up empty storefronts, you know, in collaboration with the city, or the park social that's happening, where it's another project. I feel like it's tangential to this one, where 18 artists in San Diego will be given $15,000 to do an art project. And I love that the way that, you know, that shifts the definition of art as not something that's as easily monetizable, that it's an object, but it's also something that is temporary and ephemeral. And so I'm in complete agreement in that, and, you know, just really like the reimagining of it. And like Kaidi said, COVID has put all of us in this sort of bind, but it's also an opportunity, right? Like, I've never been to so many talks in my life. I've been around the world in art talks and things like that, and I'm like, why wasn't it like this before? So that also reminds me that, you know, like the poem I was reminded of, that COVID is a portal and we should take as least amount of baggage as possible, and that baggage is the baggage of the old way we used to do things.
Yes, you know, I'm inspired by what you say, and also what Anthony said about an ecosystem. So, and I think also sometimes people get defensive, you know, when big organizations think that, oh, we're going to have to give it to the small organizations, now that's going to be taken away from us. I think instead think of us, how can you collaborate? How can a big organization support the smaller organizations? Because maybe you could align in so many ways. So I think that's another approach, that we are all connected, and that's also something we realized during this time, that we need each other, and so that's, you know, I think a new approach that we can take.
When I first heard about this initiative to buy art directly from artists, I was frankly stunned. I couldn't believe it was happening. It's such a poetic thing to have happened, for a giant, you know, city to reach down to individuals, and it's not easy for them to do it because the administration costs for the city to like talk to so many different people and write so many different checks is immense. It's so much easier for them just to write one big check than 100 small checks. So it's just an amazing thing that happened. I love the from the bottom up approach here, and I think I remember seeing an email come down my inbox for another city initiative where they were giving out grants to nonprofits, but only nonprofits that they were capped at an annual revenue of a pretty low number. That's another really beautiful moment that I don't know the specifics, but it's kind of the same ethos and the same idea. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah, we can't say thank you enough to the city, and we just don't want it to stop. That's the thing. We want it to be ongoing. Okay, here's what we want to know, though, now, from you guys. With respect to the current exhibition, San Diego Practice, of course, what was the process and interactions among the group, among you guys? It was undoubtedly difficult to choose just 100 pieces of art from so many great artists in the city. How did you do it? What was the process, the techniques?
I mean, I can explain. So, I mean, it was arduous, but we were fortunate that the commission and the city have like an incredibly robust system in place. And this like reflects a lot of the work they do, whether you're sitting on a public art selection committee or, you know, this incredible opportunity with San Diego Practice. You know, everyone has to independently review every submission, which was tons, way more than 100.
How many?
What? I thought it was like 1,000. No, it was higher than 1,000. Thousands. It was a lot, and it was like a very, very full Google Drive folder that we all like went through, and I think we had like a month to review. And then I remember, because it was Labor Day weekend, so I was just saying, like, it was like a year ago, we gathered around Zoom and we all went around and, you know, kind of cast a vote. You know, you kind of score every object that had been submitted. And then the city kind of dutifully recorded all of those things. And so then things were ranked and we could go back through and have discussions. So if, you know, I had given someone a 1 and Gaidi had given them a 5, or if he had given them a 5 and I had given them a 1, you know, we had an opportunity to have a discussion, which, you know, was really exciting in those opportunities to kind of think freshly about something that maybe you, I don't know, viewed too quickly, or to really defend your stance on something. And then it was, I mean, it wasn't necessarily that we were setting out to just like pick 100, but we were kind of ordering them in this fashion. And then my understanding was the city just purchased until the funds were depleted. And it turned into this nice round number. I don't know if anyone else has comments about what it was like working as a group, but.
I think it was really interesting. And we met, I think it was 3 days, was it? 3, or you remember, Christine, was it 3 days? For like maybe 4 or 5 hours each day on Zoom. So imagine that. It's not easy to be focused, you know, for so long on Zoom. But I think that everybody was very thoughtful, you know, in reviewing all of the works. We spent also a lot of time, you know, reviewing every application, scoring the works, and what I had a lot of respect for all of my colleagues in the panel, that everybody was very thoughtful in their comments. And you have 5 people, and so obviously they're gonna have slightly different perspectives and points of view, and that's, I think, what you know, what you want in a panel, to have people that come and bring slightly different, and you will see by the works in these galleries in Bread and Salt and SDAI that what we selected was also very, very rich but very diverse. And so that meant that it was successful. But it was very difficult to narrow it down from, you know, the hundreds and hundreds of artists to then have, you know, 100 artists selected. And I also have to say that there were artists that were my favorites that didn't get selected. And I'm sure that was the case for all of us. But that's the process. You follow this democratic process. In my museum studies class right now, we're gonna go into a selection of artists for a group exhibition. And so I'm gonna teach my students that whole process so that it demystifies it, and so that people understand that it's never about, oh, you know, I wasn't picked because my work wasn't as strong. It's not, that's not the case. We all had different perspectives and different views, but for this particular prize, we kind of all had to align, you know, for the ones that got selected. So I just those are my recollections.
It was a marathon, right? Like in hour 4, you're just like, but I think we all just, I appreciate this group so much in that we all operated as if we had a responsibility, and, you know, let's all, you know, for example, let's all go back and look at the statement again to see if there's something we're not seeing here, you know, or let's just review this entire portfolio again. And, you know, those moments, honestly, I was like, whoa, really? Okay. Because it was like hour 4. But that's why I appreciated being on this panel so much with such dedicated people. And I felt like I owed them, and also that I owed the artists, you know, in just, you know, doing my duty and making sure I go through every single one as dutifully as I can. And how amazing is it that we just happen to arrive at a similar demographics to that of the city. That was not planned. And so I think that was just simply amazing.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it was a marathon. Some of those like from 1 to 6:30 in the evening and that, on Zoom, but I was honored to do it, and I was really respectful of all the comments and having, as you mentioned, to go back and look again, to make sure we were following the guidelines, make sure diversity was involved, all those things. It was very important and just humbling to have these great minds working on the same thing together to accomplish this.
And also, I think what was difficult is that we had a finite amount of money, to work with. So even if we maybe even if all of us liked a few other artists, there was only so much money. So hopefully, the city will find another donor at some point or fund it in some way, because I think this is very needed, and I think it's just going to be wonderful to have this artwork in libraries, in other public buildings, and to enhance those community spaces, but also to continue, because we have great number of artists here in San Diego and the region that are deserving. So maybe this is just the beginning, and this will happen, again. I'm putting the city on the spot, but yeah, hopefully we can do that again.
I love your answers. You could hear the care and compassion and commitment that you all had to that process, and must have been very difficult. I sometimes committees like yourself that have a scoring system, and by the way, did you know the budgets of each piece of art as you were, so you knew a lot of factors. So you knew if you had like one piece of art for 5,000, it would preclude a bunch of other ones for a few hundred. So these are all very difficult decisions. Did it occur very often that, say, an artist scored very low or somewhat low when you just tallied up all the numbers, but then in the discussions they popped up higher, and vice versa? Did those kind of things occur, or did they mostly follow the numbers?
Yeah, I think they happened. There were definitely, and I think part of it is because it goes back to this level of care, that like this number system was a really important kind of guide for beginning the discussion, but I think that then there really was this thoroughness to reviewing everything. And the numbers are there, but this is also art, and we do bring a lot of really different perspectives to this. So there might have been an instance where, you were just shocked at the score that got or this got, or, and then that led to a really rich discussion. So yeah, without having like specific examples in mind, like that definitely, it felt like that was happening constantly throughout the process.
And I think that one of your responsibilities as a panelist in any kind of panel is that you are, in a way, selected to be the voice and to be an advocate. And sometimes if an artist scored low I think we were pretty consistent, when we did like a first pass that people who scored high, but then there was maybe a few instances where an artist was passed, and maybe one of us would say, well, let's go back and look at this person. And because sometimes things don't always translate, in images or slides. So I think that's a heavy responsibility for panelists to be advocates too, but also we also know that we are not art czars either. So it's not like who you want or who you pick. It's about having this dialogue and this consensus. So you have to discuss and deliberate.
That was the other odd thing, is to see them all on a computer rather than, like other kind of jury selections that I've been at, you can actually literally go through the real pieces. So, that kind of aura wasn't there, and I imagine that was to the detriment of some of the artwork.
Yeah, and those of us who teach art, that's a big issue, like having students look at an image on a screen or in a book as opposed to in person. Some works just don't translate because of their scale or their the texture or other details. So that's also always a challenge too. But it's exciting actually to be here to see when we got to see the works in person. It was really exciting.
I was just going to say that, like, that it was part of the discussion, though, because, like, you'd be reviewing and you'd be like, okay, well, like, let's look at the medium line. Like, what really is? Oh, it's acrylic on canvas, or it's a black and white, print. Like, and that became part of the conversation as well, which is that, we also do have different expertise, and just kind of talking through what those materials might look like in person, or, other, like, kind of practical considerations in terms of, like, the city is committing to steward this object into the future, and that was one of the criteria. Like, did we think this was going to fall apart in 6 months? Or do we think this will last as an object, which is also another tricky thing when you're thinking about collecting and collections. So yeah, just to say that those were like all of these kind of discussions that we were having.
It was odd to try to imagine the size of things, like just trying to gauge it based on the window I was looking at and trying to like recreate the affect for myself. So yeah, being that level removed was a little odd for me.
Thanks, you guys. That was a really great description of what happened behind the scenes, and I think necessary for everyone to hear. And I'm really impressed with the way you handled it. Thank you for that. Okay, most of the people in this room are art collectors in one way or another, and all the people out in the virtual world too. What does it mean to be a collector in our region, and what are the motivations for collecting art regionally?
Well, I am passionate about the art that's produced in this region, partly because in my scholarship and as a teacher, academic, I'm really interested in border art and art that is generated, having this discussion about migration and labor and the fact that the indigenous communities that were here. And so for me, being in San Diego and being close to Tijuana is really exciting as a collector. And I have that as the focus of the works that I purchase. And my collection is all small works because I have a small house. So it's all small works or prints that are mostly unframed. But it's developing this narrative. And the other thing that's also my focus is Chicano artists and women artists and women with a feminist bent to their work. So I curate a lot of those things in the gallery space, and that's a passion, and I think you have to follow your passion. But I also have a much more diverse selection of exhibitions in the gallery, but that's a slight difference between what I collect personally and then what I exhibit. But I wouldn't choose to live anywhere else in the world because I think the vibrancy and the excitement that I see of artwork being produced by artists here in San Diego and Tijuana is really unique.
I would say that like collectors are part of that ecosystem. It's that part of the patronage, and so I think especially for someone who's thinking about collecting with an emphasis on local artists, or even just as a part of their collecting, at whatever scale that is, it's an exciting opportunity to have a kind of to support an artist and to support their work over time. And I think especially when you're thinking about things in the local context or the regional context, that allows you to kind of develop relationships with artists, and hopefully then that also becomes part of like stewarding works into the future, which collectors are also doing. And I think that you also see that relate into larger institutions. You see that relate to longer histories. Especially today with like renewed attention to artists of color. So many of those works from more historical periods, we only have those because of collectors in the moment who were supporting artists and caring for those objects at a time when larger institutions weren't. And then that kind of carries forward into the future in all sorts of ways.
As a follow-up to that, what role do you think institutions have in addressing, quote, the moment, such as the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, and others, whether through choices you make with acquisitions or the exhibitions you put on. How dominant does the moment become for your institutions?
The Black Lives Matter movement in particular focused a lot of energy on African American culture. In fact, it's like there's a light that's being shown on it, if you will, and we're getting lots more interest, people interested in what we're doing and the art that we're doing, help in getting the art there. Jonathan Glaus has been very special to us, as well as many other organizations in town that have reached out and said, let's work together. So it really has been an important aspect. Our last exhibit was Say Their Names, where we honored those people who had been killed by police brutality and racism, and it was a wonderful exhibit, but more so than that, we had a lot of funders who gave us money before they even knew where it was going to be. And I was really humbled by that. We didn't know when and where, but we still were able to fundraise, partly because of the interest in the Black arts and Black community.
I mean, in my case, at our college, it's something that I have always been passionate about, because I was painting assistant to Judith Baca, who was painting the Great Wall, which was revealing, the hidden histories of those communities that had been ignored, and so she was talking about Japanese Americans and Latinos, Chicanos, and the leaders of the city that had been unrecognized. So for me, it's what I tell my students is that the movement that we are seeing right now, something similar, was happening in the late 60s and 70s, that you had the civil rights movement, that you had Black activists joining with Chicano activists and working together. So for me, it's not something that it's new in the sense that I've always been focused on that in my curation and my teaching, but I'm excited that it's now permeating, everywhere else, and that I can maybe, tap into those artists that I've shown and that I've known and supported, and now direct them to these other opportunities that are out there. So
I say take this moment and make it a movement. And I believe that in, my day job at Southwestern College, and in particular taking the moment, that idea of Asian hate as being, in kind of the, public narrative at the moment, and turn it into a structural existing thing by creating an AAPI affinity group on campus. And so, I have this bumper sticker that says thoughts and prayers, and that part's crossed out, and instead on the bottom it says policy changes. So I say, let's make it into a movement.
It's interesting enough, as I talk about this to other professionals and other arts people, there's a fear that this is very temporary. And I hear it all the time. Like, this is not gonna last, so we better make hay while the sun is shining, so to speak, and try and do those things that now that this light is shown on the Black community, and utilize this time to make things happen. But there's a real fear that it's not gonna last. This is only for a short period, and I hear it all the time.
One of the things that's so interesting about when things bubble up into the moment is that, those issues did not emerge in that moment. Those issues were already there, and we've only now just, some of us are only just now seeing them, other people are realizing them in new ways, or people are starting to talk about them that, previously weren't for whatever reason. And so, exactly like everyone's saying, the challenge is to take the moment and to make it a lasting conversation, and to allow it to inform the work that we're doing at, even deeper and structural levels, and that change, and that change is going to take time, and has to happen in outward facing ways, like the exhibitions and the collecting that we're doing, but it also has to be internal. It has to be the structure, like the institutions that we all are affiliated with. Perhaps we need to look at our own models of how we work and how those are related to these issues. And yeah, it's just the thing for me that is always, I think, important to remember is that it's these issues were already here.
We have several artists from Bread and Salt that have had their own shows like more than one time, and you really love their work and you support their work. But what steps have you done when you really love an emerging artist and you believe in them? What do you do to assist them to try and bump them into a new market that they haven't reached before, like part of the national scene or the international scene? Are there steps that you have taken to help specific artists? And if so, what are they? What have they been?
Judy Baca has become a conversation, I feel.
Well, I just think that as a curator, one of the reasons that I switched from being an artist to being a curator was because I felt that there was a need, very much a need for, at the time when I started doing this in the 90s, for more Latinas. Now there's Latinas in leadership, in museums and in the arts. Is definitely changing. But I definitely learned a lot from, from working with Judy Baca, and she always being in kind of opposition to the mainstream art. But it's giving them a platform, I guess, to, that's why I think exhibitions are so important, and whether it's a physical exhibition, whether it's virtually, I think that is key to teach about those artists, to include them in our curriculum is really important. If it's an emerging artist, I tell them that, I'm going to say something that I tell my students, and maybe people find that disappointing because it goes against a romantic notion that you're going to be an artist and be in your studio and you're going to be discovered. I tell emerging artists that you have to be out there and you have to be working with whatever community you want to work, because Judy worked with, at-risk youth, she worked with the Chicano community, she worked in public art, she found her niche. So find your niche, find the community that you're going to be comfortable with working, and go and establish those relationships and that network. Because you can be the most amazing artist, but my father told me about like the most amazing saxophone player, he played more beautiful than anybody else, but he was alone in his studio, and nobody heard him. So you can be the most amazing artist, but the reality is that you have to get out there. And as administrators or curators or supporters of the arts, we can only do so much. The artist also has to, do that work. That's.
But as institutions, I think there are things that can be done, like creating workshops for artists to gather, or seminars, and different how-to type of workshops, because after the forced camaraderie of art school, there is no, you kind of have to find your own. So to create those moments, those spaces, I think that's where institutions can come in and create that space and that moment for those kinds of connections to be made. And also, I just love the Judy Baca show so much, and it really just brought out the importance of that artist to the fore. And that's really, I think, one of the great things about curating is you get to change the way in which people see the world. And with shows like the solo show at Judy Baca, I feel like that was done.
Yeah, she was. Well, thank you. It's an exhibit that I curated at the Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach, and it's the first time that museum is really exhibiting a Chicana artist, and that Chicanos, because Chicano artists were left out of the Latin American artist group. They're considered to be Mexican American, so it was a great coup for the museum to agree to exhibit her work, and she was so touched. And I think the thing is that it's so important to celebrate those artists, as the museum is doing now with Yolanda Lopez, because they struggled, to have that. They created important works, but they struggled to have a presence. So thank you for, yeah. So anyways, you.
Okay, this is kind of a silly question. But what exhibition, not yet realized, would you challenge yourself with putting together in the next 3 years? Well, I'll take it out to the next 5 years to give you more time. Do you have any pet like secret projects you'd like to put out there?
Yeah, I do.
What?
I'm working, as we talked about earlier, about the two-prong approach, the local approach and the online approach. And so this is the 60th anniversary of the Freedom Riders, who young people between 18 and 25 for the most went down to infiltrate the lunch counters and the bus stations in the South in 1961. John Lewis was on that first bus. And when they got to Birmingham, of course, they burned out the bus and firebombed them while they were inside the bus. And after that, some 300 more people came from all over the United States on buses to go down there and do that. They are now 64 that are still alive. And so the idea I had, it came from going to Wonder Spaces. And I went to Wonder Space and I said, wow, maybe we can have a way that we could immerse people in the civil rights movement and actually be there, be next to them. And so I started going down that rabbit hole and found that there's VR for Good, for instance, that Facebook does, where they're getting people to tell stories. There's one called Traveling While Black, and when you can sit on the bus almost next to Rosa Parks, and you feel like you're sitting next to her and talking to her. And they're doing that type of work, and I thought, aha, I don't have to build a big building. I could do it maybe through this online aspect, as well as bring them here, have those families of the writers that are alive come and help cut the ribbon, have the immersive aspect of it where you can put on your goggles and feel like you're on that bus, and at the same time have an actual bus that was decorated potentially. So it's all this, it's not, it's, philosophical. Guess what? It's gonna happen, put it that way. This will happen. It's just in the beginning stages. So.
I feel like this is also what, something that reveals the different ways that we're all working, and this is an important part of the ecosystem. But at the museum, we're 3 to 5 years is our normal projection. So my next exhibition is in 3 years. It's about the history of medicine and related to Pacific Standard Time, which will be sweeping Southern California again in 2024. So I have to admit that that's my big thing on the horizon, and I don't have any big ideas kicking around after that, not yet.
I do want to add though that I was in a conference and everybody was talking about 2026. I don't know if everyone is aware of like this big thing of it's the 250th anniversary of the United States, and so there's a big push for arts and funding and things that go on during that year.
Okay. Thanks for playing along. Oh, wait, go ahead.
I just want to say that my big idea is to invite other people to curate in our space. Because I love to bring in guest curators. And my students are curating an exhibition now where we're seeking proposals for an exhibit that's titled Sowing Seeds. That's about, thinking about rebirth and growing something. And so every year my students actually come up with an idea for an exhibition. But I have brought guest curators to our space, and I would love, to have I've had some of my graduates and some other voices, because there's only so many times that you can you know, I have my own interests, so I love to bring other perspectives into the space. So that's what I've asked, you know, I'm looking forward to asking like Francisco M., who's at the front, you know, to curate a show there because of what he's interested in. I've had Andrea Chung, who's an artist, curate at the space. I've had Danielle Deary, Kaya Sari, so I would love to just reach out to more people to curate.
Thank you. What do you look for in emerging art, and what qualities do successful artists across lots of different kinds of art, but are there common qualities that artists that are going to prove to be successful in the field have? And if so, what are they?
Well, how do you define successful?
Good question. How do you define success? How do you define success? We should start there. What is it? I guess we could start there. What would a successful artist
I mean, do
be?
you define successful by somebody who shows in big museums? Do you define successful by somebody who's committed to their craft, whether their show, or maybe do you define successful somebody who can invest their time and is passionate about making things, and maybe they don't show it in the big, you know, institutions, or they don't sell it. Maybe they're out in the community, like Judy Baca, making murals. So I think the definition of successful is kind of hard, you know, to tackle because we all have different ideas of what successful might be.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to say what is a successful artist, you know, and especially like I'm not an artist, you know, so I don't know how, you know, others might individually feel, but at least when talking about perhaps maybe a work of art, you know, that I find successful, you know, the thing that is common to it might be that it does help you think about and see ideas in new ways, you know, and then those ideas are so broad, you know, like it could be that, you know, you're gaining new insights or perspectives into like the social landscape or our shared world, but it can also be, you know, it is this dialogue happening within art, you know, when you see artists who are interested in formal compositions and they're helping you think about materials and shape and form and the way that we see in new ways, like that is also successful to me. You know, there are so many different ways, and so I think there's an importance to have a certain, you know, clear intention to what you're doing as an artist, and to the work that you're making and why you're making it and the questions that you're asking. But beyond that, I mean, it is kind of like this limitless, you know, thing, and certainly that's why I look to art and I look to artists to help, you know, guide me in understanding everything.
I mean, artists like give form to systems that we feel, but we don't have words for yet, you know? And I think that those kinds of artworks are really successful, you know, to have that message resonate and register for the audience to, you know, change and help us figure out, you know, ourselves better. But I think that a lot of people define success in terms of monetary terms, right? That's like what we're all avoiding, like how can they be rich or whatever. And I think that that's really where institutions can help, that it's, you know, a successful artist isn't necessarily tied to, you know, how many likes or tweets, like, you know, the non-fungible stuff that's out there lately, but that it's somehow, you know, removed away from those kinds of, you know, market forces and things like that, you know, and have some sort of aesthetic value beyond it. And I think that's where institutions play an important role.
I mean, I think that also connects to your earlier question about, you know, how you can support artists and support emerging artists in particular, and it builds on what Alessandra was saying, which is to lend whatever platform you may have, you know, and to remember that so much of these things are done, you know, as dialogues and through relationships and through, you know, kind of support that is, you know, hopefully reciprocal. And so, you know, in the same way, like, an exhibition is an opportunity for an artist to realize work or to exhibit their work in a specific way that allows them to do something that they had not yet done, to realize a project in that form, and that too can be a form of success in its many ways.
I have one final, do you have one more follow-up?
Well, I was just thinking about, when do you think, an artist or their work is successful, or it's also very subjective too. Because I've been in panels where, or in conversations, curatorial panels with people where I love somebody's work and everybody hates it, and they don't think, and when I went to school, when I went to UCLA, they didn't consider Chicano art to be good art, right? They didn't see the value of it. They didn't understand the context. They didn't really, they qualified it as being inferior, because those artists hadn't been trained or weren't doing conceptual or abstract. And so I think that that's tough. But I think there's still a lot of resistance. I always tell my students, there's different types of art. There's people who do graffiti art, and there's people who want to do a work that's very formalist and very conceptual. I don't see that one is less than the other, but in a kind of capitalist system that we have and colonial system that we have, there is a hierarchy. And so my role all the time is to try to break down that hierarchy. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you. All right, we have one more question, and then audience members, if you have questions, you can take turns walking up to the mic up there, or I will give you this mic. Final question is, yesterday, for example, at the opening here, we had tons and tons of people come through Bread and Salt to see the show. I never seen so many people in one day come through here. And a lot of them were young people. And a pretty high percentage of those young people probably have not started collecting art yet. So my question is, what would your advice be to someone setting out to support contemporary artists? And what, in your view, is the best way of doing this? How do you start a collection? What techniques? How do you do it? Is there a certain percentage of income you put into collecting art? What do you suggest?
I have to say that the first work of art that I bought was one of Lalo Alcaraz's prints, who's now, very famous syndicated cartoonist, and he produced the movie Coco, and so that he had done a print for Self-Help Graphics, and I bought it for $75. And now it's worth, a lot more, but I love that print. That was back in the 90s, and Self-Help Graphics would have this sale, and it was, and other works I bought, like paying an artist like $100 every month, or $50 every month. So I think it's about, if you love art, and I grew up with art. My father was an artist, and so all his friends were artists. So if you love art, you'll find a way. And it doesn't have to be, if you're spending $5 on coffee every day, maybe put $5 in a piggy bank, and that's gonna be your art money at the end of the year. And there's art that's affordable out there. There's a lot of emerging artists that you can support. And then there's galleries that and artists that maybe are more established, or whose work maybe you can't afford at once, but you could figure out payments. But I think it's about collect what you love, and what calls out to you, and what you want to live with.
It's about passion to me. Having I started out working in art galleries, selling art sometimes with collectors, and it really changed me personally because of when you see someone who loves a piece of art and the passion that goes with it and the kind of person that loves the art, it's so gratifying to be in that situation, or talking with them, or working with them. It's really about passion. I'll tell you a story. and I've told this once before, but there was a time, when the police come behind you as a black person, you get really scared. I mean, you get really scared. You don't know why. So I'm driving down the street near my house going toward the freeway, and I see the police behind me. I'm going, well, what are they fighting? Everywhere I turn, they would turn. So I finally decided I would turn into a little Mexican grocery and go inside. He went in there. And so it was, the police was at an art gallery opening that I was at, and he wanted to know how much it was to buy a piece of art. And that's the reason he was following me around. I'm like, just freaking out. But that passion for the love of the art, the piece that he saw, you can see it. It's a certain thing. If you love something like that, it just hits you in the right way, you should get it. Do what you can to get it.
All right, thank you. Okay, audience, anybody have questions for the panel?
So first of all, I'm Michael Camacho with the VAPA Foundation, and I would love to connect with all your community affairs, outreach, relations teams. But I guess my question is, I wanted to know, since the Public Arts Selection Committee is sort of new, like what was its makeup? Like how many people were on it? Did its demographic match the city's demographic as well, similar to how you said your artists match the demographic of the city? And then my other question, I'll save it for later, I can't remember it right now.
In terms of the art selection panel for SD practice, that was new. But the Commission for Arts and Culture and the various panels that they convene have, there have been several of those. And so in addition to the four of us, there was one other panelist for SD practice named Derek Cartwright. So it was an intimate group of 5 of us.
And then, so my follow-up question is, now that this Public Art Committee exists, assuming it's going to continue in perpetuity, was it created because there wasn't enough visual art funding for the city? And VAPA stands for Visual and Performing Arts. So what came to mind in my head was, is it to catch up to performing arts, or now that this exists, the performing arts also need to catch up to visual arts?
Well, this committee was, out of one very specific project. So it was kind of a one-off that we will continue in, by finding some way to secure additional funding. So yeah, that's all I have. I don't know if there's a better answer to that.
Well, this committee was specifically for SD practice, which was a one time. There is a Public Arts Commission, which I served in years past, and that one, funds a lot of different projects, and that will continue. And that also, I think that the city seeks to have a diverse group of panelists. That's really important. And so, but I don't know if maybe somebody from the city would best answer that question.
Any other questions from the audience?
Let me just sit down with this. Oh, okay, I'll stand then. So my question is more live for me. Thanks. There was a lot of talk about emerging artists, and I haven't taken a look at the names of these artists, but I'm wondering if it was a criteria of the board to specifically choose artists that you knew were on a path to be career artists. So in other words, did you look at their school or other shows that they were part of, or did you evaluate them formally and say, wow, this is really an artist that's, part of what's happening at this moment in terms of what, formal exploration artists are pushing. And then also, if that is the case, what's kind of the follow-up? So in other words, will you follow their careers? Will you touch back in a year or two, see where they are with their studios? Do you help provide support or connections to them to other, larger institutions? In other words, where will all of these pieces go, and who are the artists, and will this be, something that continues on in the future?
I think the artwork is going to be in city properties, right? Different areas of city property. And as far as whatever you consider like traditional credentials of art or hierarchies of art, that didn't really exist for us, did it? And that's why there's artists that run from junior college to Fulbright scholars to Guggenheim fellows. So it really was more of a snapshot of the diversity that is San Diego, from, you know, people who don't follow the traditional hierarchy of art school to, you know, people who've gotten the Guggenheim Fellow.
Yeah, and I think that there was a range. I mean, when we were looking at the work, we really were looking at the artwork. That was the primary thing that we were looking at. Not so much looking at somebody's resume, and really, really looking at the artwork and how we felt that it related to the region, to the city, to capturing, you know, what this place is. And so that was our main criteria. I think rarely we looked at people's like CVs, or it was only if we had, you know, doubts. And so, for example, I knew a lot of, you know, a lot of the artists, and some of them were emerging. I had 5 of my students who were in graduate school whose work got selected, so they were just still in graduate school or out of school. And there's a couple of professors, but there were a lot of other artists that I don't know, and some of them were very established. So there was a whole range.
But also, you didn't know how we were going to vote on the people you were connected
Exactly.
to. So.
I knew those students, but I didn't say these were, you know, I didn't vouch for them in the sense that I didn't have the group pick them, but they just happened to be picked. We just had good artists. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Well, thank you for sharing your perspectives. I'm a local artist, and I was really curious when you mentioned the importance of artists to get their work out there and also to have a presence in the community. I was wondering if each of you could share what you think are maybe the new strategies of finding a way to not only find an audience for your work, but to be part of that community, especially in this really unusual, strange, perplexing moment that we all find ourselves in, where it seems like the landscape is changing right under our feet.
It's a great question, because I think, you know, the answer a year ago would have been to go to openings and introduce yourself to people, and that's obviously so much harder, but I do think it's still possible, you know, coming to events like this, and you know, I think the reality is so much of participating in an artistic community is exactly that, is kind of showing up and trying to make connections, and you know, to have very real, you know, relationships with other people that you want to be in community with, and then those, you know, that is what gets your work out there. And you know, those communities exist in so many different ways. I think they exist in spaces like Bread and Salt. They exist in places like MCASD, I hope, and they also exist online, which is, you know, something Gaidi was talking about. But it you know, it is it's Instagram, it's the online viewing rooms, it's going to the Zoom webinars, and you know, if you see a familiar name in the chat box, you know, that was something that, you know, for me was really nice over the pandemic, was, you know, being in the Zoom chat box with old friends. So that's, I guess, one option, like one idea.
With people with masks on, I can't tell like the age group of the audience, but one of the my younger students was telling me that institutions need more Instagrammable spaces so that they become events. And you know, I don't know how I feel about that, but that's a thing.
You know, it feels like that this current moment, like this moment, you mentioned it, that you've never seen so many people young people come through ever, and it seems to be there is this kind of, there's been a number of occasions when I've seen a bunch of people that hadn't seen each other in a year, They haven't been together a year. We haven't been around as many people in a year. So right now, there is a time to actually be out. Protect yourself, of course, but be out and show yourself and get to know people again. I mean, right now, it seems like there is this need to see and be around people again, and that might just help.
Well, I'm strange because I'm an artist, but I'm an extrovert. So I know that for me, it's very easy. I literally, and partly because I shifted from being an artist to being a curator and an educator, and I take it very seriously to try to get to know as many artists as I can. So for the last 20 years I've lived in San Diego, except when my twins were really tiny in 2003, 4 or 5. I basically go to art openings probably 3 nights a week. Yesterday I went to 4 art openings. And for me, it's like about seeing what's out there, seeing who's out there, because I'm not gonna be waiting for the artist to come to my door, knock on my door. You know, I get a lot of people, but it's my responsibility to go out there and to be seen and to be connected. And out of those social events, so many interesting collaborations come about. And I think it's because I really yearn. For me, one of the most nurturing and productive times was when I worked, when I worked with Judy Baca and with other artists collaboratively, and we worked together, when I worked in collectives, and also when I was in graduate school. And I always yearn for that, to be having that dialogue with other artists and connecting with them. So for me, that's what I do. I just go out to as many exhibits that I can to just talk to people, see the artist works.
We have time, I guess, for one or two more questions. Anybody else?
Hi there. Thank you all. Oh, can you hear me? Hi. Thank you all for the time. I was wondering if you were to work together again or individually, if you might consider documenting or sharing any of the difficult but super interesting conversations you have around selection while that's going on.
Aren't we doing that right now? But the selection criteria and things like that are all, I think, on the city's website for most of it. So artists who apply are aware of the criteria and things of that nature, and the whole process is really, really transparent, I think.
Did that answer your question? Okay. One more question. Is anyone?
I had kind of a similar question about, when you're taking 1,000 pieces of work and narrowing it to 100, and you have differences of opinion from, 5 to 1. How do you, I imagine there's ego and passionate opinions on that. How do you, resolve those issues amongst each other?
I think it was very civil. I mean, it happened quite a bit that someone would do a 5 and some other one would do a 1, and then we had conversations and looked at it again, and we go back and look at it again, and then even at the end, there was like, okay, we only have so much money. Can we look at it a 3rd time and see what we could do? So we went back on a number of occasions, but it was very civil. And humbling in one sense, in that, I was really surprised when I chose the 5 and Derek chose the 5 too, like, really, you too? And so, I mean, it was just very, very civil and very engaging, and I think respectful of each other's ideas.
Looking at the artist statements again and reading it together again. Some people read faster than me, and so it'd be like, wait, I'm not done yet. Okay, next page. Okay, and then we would all read it together, and so it was a really earnest thing. So if there was huge discrepancy in the initial ranking of the art, we would go back and look at the application materials.
Yeah, I think it's In some cases, some artists, our scores were pretty similar, and then you would get to some artists where they were completely, very disparate. So then that's when we had to tackle and have a dialogue, and not tackle each other literally, but have a dialogue about it. And it was hard because sometimes I loved an artist and I tried my best, and and people didn't see what I saw in that artist. And I think like in anything in life, like sometimes you'll be with a group of people where you won't agree, but you have to come to a consensus. So you have to compromise, I guess, or sometimes just you're not it's really by majority of the votes too, because you're doing the scoring. So it really is about how those scores it really added up. It's just mathematical. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you come out and you're like, oh, I love this artist, and they didn't make the cut, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that it was really a finite project, like there were plenty of people, from 100 to 150 that we would have loved to have, acquired WorksBy or supported the acquisition of WorksBy, but like it was just finite. But yeah, there was just like this really nice, like we were each other's checks and balances, like you had to stop and like look just more closely and to slow down, which was like a great part of the process.
Thank you all very much for the care that you took in selecting the artists. Like, I'm convinced that you were very careful. It was a very difficult job, but thank you for the work that you did on that. And thank you for your thoughtful answers to the questions. Thanks for being here tonight. Thank you, audience, for taking the time as well. And thank you, City of San Diego, one more time for being behind this wonderful initiative. And maybe there's a way we can figure out how to do it on an ongoing basis from here on out. On behalf of Bread and Salt, thanks for coming out tonight. Our next opening here is October 9th, where we host the San Diego Art Prize. So we'll see you then. Thanks so much.
Thank you.